The February rain fell relentlessly over the outskirts of Nashville, Tennessee, creating a thick curtain of water that made visibility on Highway 100 nearly impossible. It was one of those cold, penetrating winter rains that seemed to seep into bones and concrete alike. The temperature hovered around 38 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to make the rain feel like tiny needles against exposed skin. James Carter squinted through the windshield of his 2014 Ford F-150, the wipers working frantically to clear his view. At 38 years old, James had the weathered hands of someone who'd spent 2 decades working with engines and machinery. His face carried the lines of a man who'd seen hardship, but hadn't let it destroy his character. Calluses marked his palms, oil stains remained stubbornly under his fingernails despite vigorous scrubbing, and his flannel shirt bore the faded logo of Carter's Auto Repair, the modest shop he'd inherited from his father 7 years ago. It was 9:47 p.m., and James was running late. His daughter Emily had a school presentation the next morning, and he'd promised to help her practice one more time before bed. The timing was terrible. He'd stayed late at the shop to finish Mrs. Patterson's Chevrolet Tahoe, a repair that had taken longer than expected when he discovered additional problems with the transmission system. He couldn't, in good conscience, let her drive away with a vehicle that might fail on her. The rain intensified as James navigated the winding road, his headlights cutting through the darkness. This stretch of highway was notorious for its lack of streetlights and cell phone reception, a rural corridor that connected Nashville's outer communities to the city center. Most locals avoided it at night, especially in weather like this. That's when he saw it. Hazard lights blinking weakly through the downpour, barely visible about 200 yards ahead. A dark vehicle sat on the narrow shoulder, dangerously close to the road. James's first instinct was to keep driving. He was already late, soaked from the earlier repair work, and exhausted. Emily was waiting, but something made him slow down. His late wife Jennifer's voice echoed in his memory. "We help because it's right, not because it's convenient." James sighed, checked his mirrors, and pulled over behind the stranded vehicle, a black 2023 Chevrolet Silverado with Texas plates. Through the rain, he could see a figure sitting in the driver's seat. He grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from his glove compartment, pulled his worn Carhartt jacket tighter, and stepped out into the storm. The cold rain immediately soaked through his jeans. James jogged to the driver's window and tapped gently. The window rolled down partially, revealing a man who appeared to be in his early 70s. He wore a simple gray rain jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. Even in the dim light, James could see the weathered features of someone who'd spent considerable time outdoors. The kind of face that spoke of a life fully lived. "You having trouble, sir?" James called over the sound of the rain hammering against metal and asphalt. "Truck just died on me," the man replied, his voice carrying a distinctive Texas drawl. "No warning, just stopped. Can't get it to turn over." "Pop the hood. Let me take a look." The man hesitated for a moment, studying James's face as if assessing his trustworthiness, then reached down to release the hood latch. James moved to the front of the truck, propped open the hood, and shone his flashlight into the engine compartment. Water dripped from his hair down his neck as he examined the components with practiced efficiency. The engine was pristine, well-maintained. This wasn't a neglected vehicle. James checked the battery connections first, then traced the ignition system components. After several minutes of inspection, he identified the problem. The crankshaft position sensor had failed, a critical component that prevented the engine from starting. He returned to the driver's window, now completely drenched. "It's your crankshaft position sensor. She's not going to start without replacing it. You got anyone you can call?" The man pulled out his phone, checked it, and shook his head. "No signal out here. I tried earlier." James looked up and down the empty highway. No other vehicles in sight. The nearest town with a hotel was Fairview, about 18 miles away. The temperature was dropping, and leaving someone stranded in these conditions wasn't an option, especially someone of this man's age. "Tell you what," James said, making a decision that would alter both their lives. "My shop is about 12 miles back toward Nashville. I can tow you there, and we'll get you fixed up. I've got that sensor in stock. Install it tonight, and you'll be on your way." "At this hour? I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering." James smiled, water streaming down his face. "Can't leave you out here. Come on, let me hook you up." 20 minutes later, James had the Silverado secured to his tow bar, and the stranger was sitting in the passenger seat of his F-150. The truck's heater worked overtime to combat the cold, filling the cabin with warm air that smelled faintly of oil and pine air freshener. "Name's George," the man said, extending his hand. "James Carter." They shook hands, and James noticed the firm, confident grip. "You from Texas?" "Born and raised in Poteet. Still got a place down there, though I'm on the road a lot. I was heading to Nashville for some business." "What about you? You run the repair shop?" "Yeah. Inherited it from my dad. Been doing this since I was 16. Dad taught me everything. Said a man who can fix things will never go hungry." James navigated carefully back onto the highway, the additional weight of the towed vehicle requiring extra caution. He was right about that. "Sounds like a good man." "The best." James's voice carried a note of both pride and grief. "Lost him 7 years ago. Heart attack. Sudden. But the shop keeps his memory alive, you know? Every tool, every technique, it's all him." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of windshield wipers and rain creating a steady percussion. George studied the interior of the truck, the well-worn seats, a school calendar stuck to the dashboard with Emily's activities highlighted in yellow, a faded photograph tucked into the sun visor showing James with a woman and a young girl, all smiling at a lakeside picnic. "You got family waiting on you?" George asked. "My daughter, Emily. She's 15. Got a presentation tomorrow, and I promised to help her practice." James glanced at the dashboard clock. 10:23 p.m. She's probably already asleep by now. She understands, though. She's grown up in this business. Knows that sometimes people need help at inconvenient times. "Raising her on your own?" James's jaw tightened slightly, a reflexive response to the wound that had never fully healed. "Yeah. Lost my wife 4 years ago. Cancer. Ovarian. Stage 4. They caught it too late." He paused, swallowing hard. "Jennifer was the strong one, the organized one. She kept us all together. When she passed, it felt like the music stopped. You know? Music. I used to play guitar, wrote some songs. Jennifer and I met at a music venue on Broadway. She was there with friends, and I was playing a Tuesday night slot, trying to get noticed like every other dreamer in Nashville. We talked until 3 a.m. that night." A sad smile crossed James's face. "After she died, I couldn't pick up the guitar anymore. Every song reminded me of her. So I just stopped, focused on Emily and the shop. That's enough." George nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful, but unreadable in the dim light. "Grief has a way of silencing parts of us we thought were permanent. I understand that more than you might think." The conversation drifted to safer topics: the unseasonably cold winter, the challenges of running a small business in an era of corporate chain auto shops, the beauty of Tennessee despite its unpredictable weather. George was an excellent listener, asking thoughtful questions but sharing little about himself. James found him easy to talk to, the kind of person whose presence felt comfortable, rather than intrusive. They arrived at Carter's Auto Repair at 11:07 p.m. The shop occupied a modest lot on the edge of a working-class neighborhood called Bordeaux, north of downtown Nashville. The building itself was a simple metal structure painted white with blue trim, somewhat faded from years of sun and weather. A hand-painted sign reading, "Carter's Auto Repair, Honest Work, Fair Prices," hung above the main garage bay. Surrounding the shop were residential streets lined with small houses, many with American flags on porches and pickup trucks in driveways. James unlocked the garage bay and activated the overhead lights, which flickered to life with a buzzing hum. The interior revealed a clean, organized workspace. Tool chests lined one wall, each drawer labeled in his father's careful handwriting. Posters of classic cars and engines decorated the concrete walls. A small office area in the corner contained a desk buried under invoices and repair manuals, a coffee maker with a half-full pot from that morning, and a bulletin board covered with photos. Emily at various ages, James and Jennifer on their wedding day, his father standing proudly in front of the shop's grand opening. "Nice place," George said, looking around with genuine appreciation. "You can tell a lot about a mechanic by how he keeps his shop. This speaks well of you." James felt a small surge of pride as he positioned the Silverado over the service bay. Dad always said, "Respect your tools and your workspace, and they'll respect you back." I try to honor that. He worked efficiently, despite his exhaustion, his hands moving with the confidence of countless repetitions. George watched from a folding chair, occasionally asking questions about the repair process. James explained each step, appreciating an audience who seemed genuinely interested, rather than suspicious or impatient. A rarity in his line of work. The crankshaft position sensor monitors the position and rotational speed of the crankshaft, James explained, as he carefully removed the failed component. When it goes bad, your engine computer doesn't know when to fire the spark plugs or inject fuel. Essentially, the brain of your truck loses communication with its heart. Troits, how long does a sensor like that typically last? Usually around 100,000 miles, sometimes more. You've been taking good care of this truck, though. Everything under here looks maintained. Just bad luck, really. These things happen. By 12:43 a.m., James had installed the new sensor, reconnected all the electrical connections, and was running diagnostic tests. The Silverado's engine roared to life smoothly, the sound filling the garage with mechanical symphony. James let it run for several minutes, checking for any irregularities, but the repair was perfect. "All set," James announced, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "She's running beautifully now. Should give you no more trouble." George stood and approached the truck, listening to the engine with evident relief. "What do I owe you?" James calculated mentally. "Parts and labor. Figure $280. That's more than fair. Make it $500 for the trouble and the late hour." "No, sir. $280 is the price. I don't charge extra for doing the right thing." James's tone was firm but friendly. "Besides, you didn't have much choice being stuck out there." George studied him for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. A mix of respect, curiosity, and what might have been recognition of something rare in modern life: uncomplicated decency. "You're a good man, James Carter. Your father raised you right, and you're clearly doing the same with your daughter. Just trying to be someone my wife would still be proud of," James replied quietly. George reached into his wallet and pulled out exact cash for the repair, adding an extra $20. "For your daughter. Buy her something nice." James wanted to refuse, but something in George's expression stopped him. He accepted with a nod of thanks. As George prepared to leave, he paused at the driver's door. "Can I ask you something, James? If you could play music again, if the grief didn't stop you, would you?" The question caught James off guard. He looked away, toward the bulletin board, where a photo showed him on stage with his guitar. Jennifer watching from the crowd with adoration in her eyes. "I don't know. It's been so long. I'm not sure I'd even remember how." Music isn't something you forget. It's like breathing. You might hold your breath for a while, but eventually, you have to let it out. George climbed into the truck, then added, "Thank you, James, for everything. Something tells me we'll see each other again. Drive safe, George, and stay off dark highways and rainstorms if you can help it." George laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "I'll do my best." James watched the taillights of the Silverado disappear into the night, the rain finally beginning to ease. He locked up the shop, climbed back into his F-150, and headed home, unaware that the kindness he'd shown would return to him in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. When he arrived home at 1:37 a.m., the small three-bedroom house was dark except for the porch light Emily always left on for him. He entered quietly, checking on his daughter. She was asleep in her room, surrounded by poster boards and note cards for her presentation. He gently pulled a blanket over her, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Love you, kiddo." In his own room, still damp from the rain and smelling of motor oil, James collapsed onto the bed. Before sleep claimed him, he found himself humming a melody he hadn't thought of in years, one of the songs he'd written for Jennifer. The sound of his own voice surprised him, and he stopped abruptly, the silence rushing back in. But for just a moment, the music had returned. And somewhere on the highway back to Nashville, George Strait smiled to himself, already forming a plan. The days following that rainy February night fell into the familiar rhythms that had defined James Carter's life for the past 4 years. Wake at 5:45 a.m., prepare breakfast for Emily, drive her to McGavock High School by 7:15, open the shop by 8:00, work until 6 or later, pick up Emily from whatever after-school activity she had, make dinner, help with homework, sleep, repeat. It was March now, and Nashville was experiencing that temperamental transition between winter and spring. Mornings cold enough for jackets, afternoons warm enough for short sleeves. The city hummed with its usual energy, the music scene preparing for the influx of tourists that would arrive as the weather improved. Downtown, the honky-tonks on Broadway were already crowded most nights, aspiring musicians playing their hearts out for tips and the slimmest chance of being discovered. James heard their music sometimes when he drove past, and he'd quickly turn up the radio to drown it out. The incident with George had faded into just another memory of helping a stranded motorist. James had mentioned it to Emily the next morning as an explanation for missing their practice session, and she'd simply shrugged with teenage understanding. Her presentation had gone well anyway. She'd earned an A- and hadn't needed his help after all. The realization made James both proud and a little sad. She was growing more independent, needing him less. On March 3rd, a Monday, the shop was particularly busy. James had 2 oil changes, a brake replacement on a Honda Civic, and a complicated electrical issue with a Ford Explorer that required 3 hours of diagnostic work. His assistant, Danny Rodriguez, an enthusiastic 24-year-old learning the trade, helped with the simpler jobs while James tackled the complex problems. "You ever think about expanding?" Danny asked during their lunch break, both men sitting on overturned buckets in the garage, eating sandwiches from the deli across the street. "Like hiring another full mechanic? Maybe taking on more commercial work?" James considered this while chewing. "My dad kept it small on purpose. Said once you get too big, you start caring more about profit margins than people. This way, I know every customer by name, and they know they're getting my full attention." "Makes sense. But don't you want more? I mean, no offense, but you could be making way more money with a bigger operation." "Money's not everything, Danny. I make enough to keep Emily comfortable, save a little for her college, keep the lights on. What else do I need?" Danny shook his head with the certainty of youth. "I don't know, man. Travel? Nice car? Maybe even, like, dating again?" James stiffened slightly. The shop had an unspoken rule. They didn't talk about Jennifer. Danny, relatively new and still learning the boundaries, had stumbled into territory marked with warning signs. "Focus on your work, kid. Mrs. Henderson's coming for that Civic at 4. The subject was closed. That evening, James picked up Emily from play rehearsal. She'd landed a supporting role in the school's production of The Importance of Being Earnest, and rehearsals ran 3 days a week. As she climbed into the truck, backpack in one hand and script in the other, James noticed the genuine excitement in her eyes, the kind that had been absent for too long after her mother's death. "How was it?" he asked, pulling out of the school parking lot. "Really good. Mr. Patterson said my delivery is improving. And Dad—" She turned to him with sudden intensity. "Chloe Anderson's mom asked if you wanted to come to their barbecue next Saturday. She said you've been avoiding their invitations." "I haven't been avoiding anything. I've been busy." "Dad, you're always busy. When's the last time you did something that wasn't work or taking care of me?" James felt the familiar defensiveness rising. "I like our routine, Em. It works. For you, maybe." Her voice carried a frustration that surprised him. "But I worry about you. You don't have friends anymore. You don't play music. You don't do anything except fix cars and watch TV. Mom wouldn't want you to live like this." The mention of Jennifer created instant tension in the small cab of the truck. James gripped the steering wheel tighter, his jaw clenched. They drove in silence for several minutes, the radio filling the space with a Luke Combs song about lost love that felt particularly cruel in its timing. Finally, Emily spoke again, her voice softer. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that." "No, you're probably right." James forced himself to relax his grip. "I just don't know how to be any other way right now. This feels safe." Safe is good, but safe and living aren't always the same thing. At 15, his daughter sounded older than her years. James wondered when that had happened, when she'd become wise enough to see through his carefully constructed defenses. They pulled into their driveway, and Emily placed her hand on his arm before getting out. "I love you, Dad. I just want you to be happy again someday." "I love you too, kiddo. More than anything." The days continued. On March 7th, James replaced the transmission in a Dodge Ram, a 12-hour job that left him exhausted. On March 10th, he attended a parent-teacher conference where Emily's English teacher praised her writing skills and suggested she consider creative writing programs. On March 13th, the washing machine broke, and James spent his Saturday afternoon fixing it, while Emily studied for exams. Life moved forward in its steady, predictable way. But on March 14th, something changed. James was under a Toyota Camry, replacing a leaking oil pan gasket, when he heard the distinctive sound of a powerful engine pulling into the shop. Danny's voice called out, "Hey, boss, you got a visitor." James rolled out from under the vehicle, wiping grease from his hands. His breath caught in his throat. The black Chevrolet Silverado with Texas plates sat in the driveway, polished to perfection, gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. And standing beside it, wearing jeans, a button-down shirt, and that same baseball cap, was George. But this time, as James approached, he noticed something he'd missed in the darkness and rain of that February night. There was something familiar about the man's features, something that nagged at the edge of recognition. And Danny's expression, the wide-eyed stare, the slack jaw, suggested the younger man had figured out something James hadn't. "George," James said, genuinely pleased to see him, "everything okay with the truck?" "Truck's running perfectly, thanks to you." George extended his hand, and they shook warmly. "I actually came by for a different reason. Got a few minutes to talk?" Sure. Let me just finish tightening these bolts. Danny, can you handle Mrs. Patterson's brake inspection? Yeah, sure, boss. No problem. Danny's voice had risen an octave, and he kept staring at George like he'd seen a ghost. James led George into the small office, offering him the more comfortable chair while he perched on the edge of his cluttered desk. What brings you back to Nashville? Business, like I mentioned before. But also, George paused, choosing his words carefully. I wanted to thank you properly for what you did that night. Most people would have driven right past. It wasn't anything special, really. It was to me. George's expression grew serious. James, I need to be honest with you about something. That night, when you helped me, you didn't recognize me. And I appreciated that more than you know. But I think it's time you knew who you actually helped. Before George could continue, Danny burst into the office, barely able to contain himself. Boss, do you know who? Danny, I'm in the middle of... That's George Strait. The George Strait. Amarillo by morning. All my exes live in Texas. The chair. Oh my God, sir. My mom is obsessed with you. Danny practically vibrated with excitement. James looked from Danny to George, confusion evident on his face. The name triggered something in his memory. Jennifer had loved country music, had played it constantly, and there was definitely a George Strait in that collection. But James had deliberately avoided music for so long that the connection hadn't formed in his grief-fogged memory. George smiled patiently at Danny's enthusiasm. Guilty as charged, young man. The realization hit James like a physical force. George Strait, the king of country music. 33 #1 hits, countless awards, member of the Country Music Hall of Fame. Jennifer had played his albums on repeat, had dreamed of seeing him in concert. James had helped one of the biggest names in American music history, and he hadn't even known it. Oh my God, James whispered. I didn't. I know. That's what made it so genuine. George's expression was kind, understanding. You helped because you're a good person, not because you recognized me. Do you know how rare that is in my world? Danny finally excused himself, mumbling something about needing to call his mother, leaving the two men alone. James struggled to process this information, his mind racing through that entire night with new context. The careful privacy, the vague answers about business, the thoughtful questions. It all made sense now. I'm sorry I didn't recognize you, James said finally. My wife, Jennifer, she loved your music. Played it all the time. I should have. Don't apologize. Like I said, that's precisely why I'm here. George leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his tone becoming more personal. James, I've been thinking about you for the past month, about what you said that night, about losing your wife, about stopping music, about raising your daughter alone. And I've been thinking about how much kindness and character you showed to a complete stranger. I appreciate that, sir, but let me finish. George held up a hand gently. I'm putting together something special next month. A private acoustic event at the Ryman Auditorium on April 18th. Small audience, maybe 150 people. Industry folks, close friends, some special guests. Alan Jackson will be there, along with a few other artists. We're celebrating the legacy of traditional country music, honoring the songs and stories that built this genre. James nodded, uncertain where this was going. I want you there, George said simply. You and Emily. Front row seats. My personal guests. Mr. Strait, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't. You could, and I hope you will. But there's more. George's eyes held a mixture of challenge and invitation. I also want you to play. The words hung in the air like smoke. James felt his chest tighten. his breath becoming shallow. "What? That night, you mentioned you used to write songs, that you played guitar before your wife passed. I've been thinking about that, about how grief silences us, how we lose parts of ourselves we think are gone forever." George's voice carried the weight of personal experience. "I've lost people too, James. My daughter Jennifer died in a car accident when she was 13. The music stopped for me too for a while, but eventually I learned that honoring her memory meant continuing to live, continuing to create." James felt tears threatening, a lump forming in his throat. "I haven't played in 4 years. I wouldn't even know what to sing." "You'd know. The music doesn't leave us. It just waits." George stood, placing a hand on James's shoulder. "I'm not asking you to decide today. Think about it. Talk to Emily. The offer stands. Come as my guest or come as a performer. Either way, I want you there. You gave me something that night on the highway, something I needed to be reminded of. Let me give you something back." From his pocket, George pulled out 2 tickets and a business card. "My personal number's on there. Call me when you decide. The event is 34 days away. That's enough time to remember who you were before grief told you who to be." After George left, James sat alone in his office for a long time, staring at the tickets. Through the window, he could see Danny attempting to work while clearly dying to ask 1,000 questions. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garage floor, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like microscopic reminders that everything was always in motion, even when we felt frozen. That evening, James told Emily about the visit. Her reaction was immediate and overwhelming. She screamed with excitement, jumped up and down, and immediately started planning what to wear. But when he mentioned George's invitation for him to perform, her expression changed to something more profound. "Dad, you have to do it." "Em, I don't think I can." "You can. You just don't think you deserve to." She sat beside him on the couch, taking his hand. "Mom loved your music. She told me once, before she got really sick, that your songs were how she knew you truly loved her, that you put your whole heart into them. That's exactly why I can't play them anymore. It hurts too much. What if—" Emily chose her words carefully. "What if the hurting is part of how we remember her? What if avoiding the music means avoiding her too?" James looked at his daughter, this remarkable young woman who'd inherited Jennifer's insight and compassion, and felt something crack in the armor he'd built around his grief. It wasn't a complete break, just a small fissure, but light began to seep through. "I'll think about it," he promised. That night, after Emily went to bed, James did something he hadn't done in 1,472 days. He went to the garage, moved aside some boxes, and pulled out his guitar case. The case was dusty, forgotten, relegated to the same category as wedding albums and clothes that still smelled like Jennifer's perfume. Precious, but too painful to face. He opened the case slowly, almost reverently. The Martin D28 guitar lay inside, exactly as he'd left it. The wood still gleamed, the strings long dead from years without tension. James lifted it carefully, feeling the familiar weight, the smooth curve of the body, the well-worn neck where his fingers had logged thousands of hours. He didn't play. Not that night. But he held it. And that was something. Over the next 2 weeks, James existed in a state of internal debate. Part of him wanted to call George and decline politely. That part argued that the shop needed his attention, that he was too rusty, that he'd embarrass himself in front of legendary musicians, that reopening this door would only lead to more pain. But another part, quieter but growing stronger, whispered different arguments. Emily's hopeful face, George's words about honoring memory through living, Jennifer's voice from a summer night years ago. Your music is beautiful, James. Promise me you'll never stop." He'd broken that promise. The question was whether he could find the courage to make it right. On March 28th, exactly 30 days after George's visit, James picked up the phone and dialed the number on the business card. His hand shook slightly as he waited for the call to connect. "Hello? Mr. Strait, it's James Carter." "James, I was hoping you'd call. What's your decision?" James took a deep breath, closing his eyes, feeling Jennifer's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. "I'll be there, and I'll play. I don't know if I'll be any good, but I'll try. That's all anyone can ever do." George's voice carried unmistakable warmth and approval. "I'll have my people reach out about rehearsal times. James, you're making the right choice." After hanging up, James sat in the quiet office, surrounded by invoices and repair manuals, and allowed himself a small smile. The fear was still there, massive and overwhelming. But beneath it, like the first green shoots after a long winter, was something else: hope. The guitar fought him at first. After 4 years of silence, James's fingers had lost their calluses, the muscle memory dulled by time and grief. The first night he attempted to play, March 29th, his fingertips burned against the new steel strings he'd installed that afternoon. Simple chord progressions that once flowed effortlessly now felt clumsy and uncertain, like trying to write with his non-dominant hand. He sat in the garage long after midnight, the space heater humming in the corner to combat the chill of early spring. Emily had gone to bed hours ago, and the neighborhood was quiet except for the occasional bark of the Hendersons' dog and the distant hum of traffic from the highway. James worked through basic exercises, scales, and picking patterns, his brow furrowed in concentration. The Martin D28 felt both familiar and foreign in his hands, like greeting an old friend after years of separation. Everything was the same, yet everything had changed. The guitar hadn't aged, but James had. His hands bore more scars, his shoulders carried more weight, his eyes held more sorrow. "Come on," he muttered to himself after botching a simple G2C transition for the 5th time. "You've done this 1,000,000 times." But that was the problem. The old James had done it 1,000,000 times. This James, the one hollowed out by loss and rebuilt around responsibility, was different. He'd convinced himself that mechanic James and musician James were the same person. But sitting here now, struggling to reconnect with something that had once been as natural as breathing, he realized how much of himself he'd left behind in that hospital room where Jennifer took her last breath. Over the next week, the practice sessions became ritual. After closing the shop at 6, picking up Emily, making dinner, and ensuring her homework was complete, James would retreat to the garage at 10 p.m. with his guitar. He started with covers, other people's songs that didn't carry personal weight. George Strait's Amarillo by Morning, a tribute to the man who'd catalyzed this resurrection. Alan Jackson's Remember When, though he had to stop halfway through the first time because the lyrics hit too close to home. Keith Whitley's Don't Close Your Eyes, the melody providing a framework to rebuild his technique. Emily would sometimes sit on the garage steps, wrapped in a blanket, listening without comment. Her presence was support without pressure, and James appreciated it more than he could express. "You're getting better," she observed on April 2nd, after he'd made it through an entire John Denver song without mistakes. "I'm getting less terrible," James corrected with a slight smile. "There's a difference. Play one of yours." The request stopped him cold. "I don't think I'm ready for that." "When will you be ready?" James had no answer. The original songs he'd written, scattered across old notebooks and buried in his memory, were vessels containing the most intense emotions of his life. Love confessions, marriage proposals, birthday tributes, late-night reflections on fatherhood. And the last one, written in the awful limbo between Jennifer's diagnosis and her death, was something he couldn't even think about without his chest tightening. On April 4th, George called to discuss the logistics of the Ryman event. His voice was warm and encouraging, lacking any of the judgment or impatience that James feared. "How's the practice coming along?" George asked. "Slowly. My fingers are remembering, but it's like learning a language I used to be fluent in. The vocabulary is there, but the sentences don't flow yet. That's normal. The body forgets in layers, and it remembers in layers too. Give it time." George paused, then added, "Have you thought about what you might want to play?" James had been dreading this question. "Not really. I mean, I've been working through covers, getting comfortable with just playing again. The idea of performing one of my own songs in front of people like you and Alan Jackson." He trailed off, the absurdity of the situation hitting him again. "James, I need you to understand something. This isn't about technical perfection or impressing anyone. This event is about authentic storytelling, the heart of country music. You have a story. You've lived through something that gives weight to whatever you create. That's what matters. But I'm not a professional. I fix cars. Bob Dylan was a coffeehouse kid who couldn't really sing. Townes Van Zandt was a troubled songwriter who most people never heard of while he was alive. Willie Nelson was considered too weird for Nashville for years." George's voice carried passionate conviction. "The professionals, the polished performers, we need them, but we also need the real people with real stories. You're one of those people." After the call, James sat with George's words, trying to internalize them. The fear of inadequacy was deeply rooted, intertwined with the larger fear of being vulnerable again, of cracking open the sealed chamber where he'd stored everything associated with Jennifer. That night, he pulled out his old notebooks. They'd been stored in a box in the bedroom closet, underneath winter sweaters and old tax returns. 3 spiral-bound notebooks with worn covers, pages filled with lyrics, chord progressions, crossed-out verses, and margin notes in his younger self's handwriting. James spread them across the kitchen table after Emily went to sleep, a cup of coffee growing cold at his elbow. Reading through them was like archaeological excavation of his own heart. Here was June Thunderstorm, written after a particularly memorable date with Jennifer, where they'd gotten caught in a downpour and danced in the parking lot. There was Emily's song, composed the night his daughter was born, his handwriting shaky from exhaustion and overwhelming love. Highway Home reflected the loneliness of a musician's life and the joy of returning to family. Morning Coffee was a simple observation of married life. Jennifer's ritual of brewing coffee at 6 a.m., her sleepy smile, the quiet intimacy of early mornings. Each song was a time capsule, and opening them released memories so vivid they felt tactile. James could smell the honeysuckle from the night he proposed. He could hear Emily's newborn cry. He could feel Jennifer's hand in his as they danced to music only they could hear. And then, on the last page of the 3rd notebook, written in handwriting that looked more ragged, more desperate, "When the light stays on." He'd written it during Jennifer's final week, sitting in the hospital room while she slept, morphine finally granting her relief from the pain that had become her constant companion. The song wasn't about death. James had been so determined not to write about death. Instead, it was about the small, persistent lights that remain even in the darkest times. The nurse who always smiled when checking vitals, the sunrise visible through the hospital window, Emily's bravery, the way Jennifer would squeeze his hand even when she was too weak to speak. James read through the lyrics slowly, his vision blurring with tears. He'd never played this song aloud. never set it to music beyond the melody in his head. It had felt too raw, too private. But now, sitting alone in his kitchen at 1:30 a.m. with the ghosts of better times surrounding him, James picked up his guitar and began to work out the chords. The next 2 weeks were intensive. James arranged for Danny to handle more of the shop's responsibilities, teaching him procedures and trusting him with customers. Danny rose to the challenge, proud to be given more authority and aware that something significant was happening for his boss. James practiced relentlessly. His fingertips developed new calluses. His voice, unused to sustained singing, grew stronger. He worked through the technical aspects, but more importantly, he worked through the emotional ones. Each time he sang, "When the light stays on," it hurt less and healed more. The song was transforming from a wound into a scar, still present, still significant, but no longer actively bleeding. Emily noticed the change in him. He hummed while making breakfast. He smiled more easily. The heavy silence that had characterized their home for 4 years began to lift, replaced by the sound of music drifting from the garage at night. On April the 10th, George invited James to his farm outside of Nashville for a private rehearsal. The property was expansive and beautiful. Rolling hills, white fences, horses grazing in pastures that looked like paintings. The main house was elegant, but not ostentatious, reflecting the same down-to-earth character that George had displayed from their first meeting. They sat on the back porch with acoustic guitars, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. George's guitar was a well-worn Gibson, marked with years of use and imbued with the character that only time can provide. "Let's hear what you've been working on," George said simply. James's hands trembled slightly as he positioned his fingers on the fretboard. He'd played in front of people before, during his earlier life, but never for someone of George's caliber. Taking a deep breath, he launched into "When the Light Stays On." The first verse shook with nervousness. The fluorescent hums above your bed. Nurses speak in whispers. Your hand finds mine, though your eyes stay closed. And I count that among the whispers of grace that keep me standing here. But by the chorus, something settled, the muscle memory fully engaged, the emotion channeled into the melody, and James forgot about impressing anyone. He was simply telling his story, the way country music had always been intended. Honest, direct, from the depths of lived experience. When the light stays on through the longest night, when the dawn breaks soft and slow, I'll remember these moments, these whispers of grace, the love that won't let go, even when you go. When the final chord faded, silence held for a moment. James couldn't bring himself to look at George, afraid of what he might see. Pity, disappointment, awkward charity. "James," George finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "That was, son, that was the real thing." James looked up, surprised to see genuine emotion in the legendary performer's eyes. "That's what country music is supposed to be," George continued. "Not perfectly polished, not calculated for radio play, just honest truth put to melody. You've got something special there." "It's rough," James said self-deprecatingly. "I'm not—" "Stop!" George's interruption was gentle but firm. "You're going to play that at the Ryman, and people are going to feel it. That's what matters. Now, let's work on your stage presence and confidence, because the song itself is already where it needs to be." They spent the next 3 hours on George's porch, playing music and talking about life. George shared stories from his career, the struggles, the losses, the moments of doubt. He spoke about his daughter, Jennifer, keeping her memory alive not through silence, but through living fully. He explained how music had been his therapy, his connection to things larger than himself. Grief is love, with nowhere to go, George said at one point. Music gives it a place. You're not forgetting Jennifer by playing again. You're honoring her by continuing to be the man she fell in love with, the one who put his heart into songs. As the sun began to set, painting the Tennessee hills in gold and amber, James felt something shift fundamentally inside himself. The guilt that had shadowed every moment of potential joy began to recede. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that rebuilding his life wasn't betrayal. It was tribute. On the drive home, James called Emily from the truck. "How'd it go?" she asked immediately. "Really good, Em. Really, really good. I knew it would. I'm proud of you, Dad." "I'm pretty proud of me too," James admitted, surprising himself with the truth of it. The week leading up to April 18th passed in a blur of final preparations. James worked with the event coordinator on technical details, sound checks, timing, where to stand, when to enter. He continued practicing, though now it felt less like labor and more like reunion. The music was back, integrated into his daily life in a way that felt natural rather than painful. On April 16th, Alan Jackson stopped by the shop unannounced. James was under a Ford F-250, replacing a fuel pump, when he heard a voice that was unmistakable from 1,000 radio plays. "This Carter's Auto Repair?" He rolled out from under the truck to find Alan Jackson standing in his garage, wearing jeans, boots, and a friendly smile. James stood quickly, wiping his hands on his coveralls, completely starstruck for the second time in a month. "Mr. Jackson, What are you?" "George told me about you," Alan said, shaking James's hand firmly. "Wanted to stop by, introduce myself before Friday. He speaks real highly of you, and George doesn't do that lightly." They talked for 20 minutes about music, about life, about the performance. Alan's presence was reassuring and humble. Another reminder that great artists were often more down-to-earth than their legends suggested. "George says you wrote a song about your wife," Alan said before leaving. "That takes courage, putting that kind of pain into music. I'm looking forward to hearing it." After Alan left, Danny emerged from the office where he'd been hiding and attempting to act professional. "Boss, your life has gotten really weird really fast." James laughed, a genuine, full laugh that felt wonderful. "Yeah, it really has." The night before the performance, James couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his guitar propped in the corner of his room where he could see it. Tomorrow, he would stand on the stage of the Ryman Auditorium, the mother church of country music, where legends had performed for nearly a century. He would play his song, his truth, his tribute to Jennifer. The fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was the kind of fear that accompanies anything worth doing. Not the fear of failure, but the fear of being fully, vulnerably human in front of others. Around 2 a.m., James got up and wrote a letter he'd never send. "Dear Jennifer, I'm playing music again. I know you'd be happy about that. Probably tell me it's about time. I'm scared, but I think it's the good kind of scared. Emily is so strong, so much like you. She's the reason I'm still here, still trying. I miss you every day, but I'm learning that missing you and living fully don't have to be opposites. The light is staying on, even in the dark, just like I promised in the song. I hope I make you proud tomorrow. I hope I make me proud too. Love always, James." He folded the letter and tucked it into Jennifer's old jewelry box, adding it to the collection of unsent correspondence he'd written over the years. A one-sided conversation with the person who shaped him most. Then he went back to bed and, surprisingly, slept. Tomorrow, the music would return to the world. and James Carter would return with it. April 18th arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that made Nashville feel like the center of the universe. The sky was crystalline blue, unmarred by clouds, and the temperature hovered around 68 degrees. Downtown Nashville pulsed with its usual energy. Tourists crowding Broadway's honky-tonks, musicians playing on street corners, the scent of barbecue and hot chicken drifting from restaurants, the constant background hum of a city built on songs and dreams. James spent the morning at the shop, unable to sit still at home. He performed routine maintenance on his truck, organized already organized tool chests, and generally tried to keep his hands busy so his mind wouldn't spiral into panic. Danny watched with amusement, wisely saying nothing about his boss's nervous energy. At 2 p.m., James closed the shop early. He drove home, showered for the second time that day, and dressed carefully in the outfit Emily had helped him choose. Dark jeans, a pressed white button-down shirt, a brown leather vest that had belonged to his father, and well-maintained boots. Looking in the mirror, he saw someone who looked like a musician, and the reflection both thrilled and terrified him. Emily emerged from her room wearing a navy blue dress that made James's throat tight with emotion. She looked so much like Jennifer, the same graceful poise, the same bright eyes full of intelligence and compassion. She'd styled her hair carefully and wore the small silver necklace that had been her mother's. "You look beautiful, kiddo," James said softly. "You look pretty good yourself, Dad." She adjusted his collar with motherly fussiness, then met his eyes seriously. "You're going to be amazing tonight. Mom's going to be so proud." "How do you know?" "Because I'm proud, and I got that from her." They drove downtown together, the Nashville skyline emerging against the afternoon sun. James had been to the Ryman Auditorium before, years ago, but approaching it now as a performer rather than audience member changed everything. The building stood on Fifth Avenue North, a red brick Gothic revival structure that had housed everything from religious revivals to the Grand Ole Opry. It wasn't the largest venue in Nashville, but it was the most sacred, the place where country music's soul resided. George had arranged for James and Emily to enter through the artist entrance on the alley side of the building. A security guard checked their names against a list, smiled warmly, and directed them inside. The backstage area was a labyrinth of narrow hallways, dressing rooms with stars on the doors, and walls covered with photographs of legends: Johnny Cash, Patsy Cline, Loretta Lynn, Dolly Parton, Hank Williams, dozens of others who'd graced this stage. "Mr. Carter? Miss Carter?" A woman in her mid-30s with a headset and clipboard approached them. "I'm Rachel Bennett, the event coordinator. Mr. Strait is in rehearsal right now, but he asked me to get you both settled. Emily, I'll show you to your seats in just a moment. James, let's get you to your dressing room and walk through the evening's schedule." Everything became procedural after that. A blessing, really, because it left less room for panic. Rachel explained that the event would begin at 7 p.m. with George performing several songs, followed by Alan Jackson, then a collaborative set featuring both artists along with surprise guests. James would perform at approximately 8:45 p.m. During a segment George was calling Voices of the Heart, authentic stories from unexpected sources. "There will be around 160 people in attendance," Rachel explained as she led James down a hallway. Industry professionals, journalists, some close friends of Mr. Strait's, and a few contest winners. Intimate crowd, very receptive. The acoustics in the Ryman are incredible. They'll carry your voice and make it richer. Trust the room. She showed him to a small dressing room with his name on a temporary placard. Inside was a mirror surrounded by lights, a comfortable chair, bottles of water, a fruit plate, and hanging on a hook, a guitar. Not his Martin D28, but a beautiful vintage Gibson J45 with a note attached. "James, This guitar belonged to my friend Keith Whitley. Been looking for the right person to play it. Tonight, you're that person. Make it sing. George. James's hands shook as he lifted the guitar carefully. The weight of history, of trust, of opportunity settled on his shoulders. This instrument had been played by a man whose voice had defined country music in the 1980s, whose tragic death had become part of the genre's mythology. And George was entrusting it to a mechanic from Bordeaux who'd barely played in 4 years. A knock on the door interrupted his reverie. George entered, dressed in a sharp black suit with a bolo tie, looking every bit the icon he was. His face broke into a warm smile when he saw James holding the Gibson. "Fits you," George observed. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified." "Honored." "Like I might throw up." James set the guitar down carefully. "George, I don't know if I can." "You can, and you will. Want to know how I know?" George sat down in the adjacent chair. "Because you already did the hard part. You showed up. You faced the grief. You picked up the guitar again. Walking on that stage tonight is just the final step of a journey you've been on for weeks. What if I freeze? What if I forget the words? Then you'll remember them, or you'll improvise, or you'll laugh it off and start again. James, perfection isn't the goal. Connection is. You've got a song that means something, that comes from somewhere real. That's all you need." Chuck Twanins. They sat together in comfortable silence for a moment. Two men from different worlds brought together by circumstance and finding unexpected kinship. "Can I ask you something?" James ventured. "Why me? You could have honored anyone, helped anyone. Why go to all this trouble for a random mechanic who fixed your truck?" George considered the question carefully. "Because you reminded me why I started making music in the first place. Not for fame or awards or money, though those are nice, but to connect with people, to tell stories that matter, to preserve something authentic in a world that's increasingly artificial." He met James's eyes directly. "You helped me without wanting anything. You were kind because that's who you are. In my experience, those are the people with stories worth hearing." Another knock, and Rachel poked her head in. "Mr. Strait, we need you for sound check. James, you're up in 30 minutes after George's set." The next hour passed in surreal fashion. James could hear the muffled sounds of the venue filling with people, the murmur of conversations, the tuning of instruments. Emily texted him a photo from her seat. Front row, center, with a thumbs up and 3 heart emojis. At 6:55 p.m., Rachel came to escort him to the side stage area where he could watch George's performance. The Ryman's interior was breathtaking. The main floor held rows of wooden pew-style benches, while the balcony curved around in a horseshoe shape. Every seat was filled with people dressed in everything from formal attire to carefully casual cowboy chic. Soft lighting created an intimate atmosphere despite the venue's size. And the stained glass windows, remnants of the building's original purpose as a church, glowed with filtered evening light. At exactly 7 p.m., the lights dimmed. George Strait walked onto the stage with his acoustic guitar, to thunderous applause. He settled onto a stool in the single spotlight, smiled at the audience, and began to play. For the next 45 minutes, James watched a master at work. George performed stripped-down versions of his classics. Amarillo by Morning, I Cross My Heart, Check Yes or No, each one delivered with effortless skill and genuine emotion. Between songs, he told stories about the music, about Texas, about life on the road, about the people who'd shaped country music's history. His stage presence was relaxed but commanding, intimate but professional. But what struck James most was the authenticity. Despite the legendary status, despite the decades of fame, George Strait was fundamentally the same person James had met on that rainy highway, genuine, grounded, present. It was a powerful reminder that success didn't require abandoning your essential character. When George finished his set to a standing ovation, Alan Jackson took the stage. His performance was equally masterful. Chattahoochee, Remember When, Where Were You, When the World Stopped Turning. Each song a demonstration of why he'd earned his place among country music's elite. The two artists then performed several duets, their voices blending in harmonies that made the Ryman's famous acoustics shimmer. At 8:40 p.m., Rachel appeared at James's elbow. "You're up in 5 minutes. Ready?" "No, but let's do it anyway." She led him to the stage right entrance, just out of the audience's view. From here, James could see Emily in the front row, her hands clasped together, her expression nervous but encouraging. He could see the faces of the crowd, industry executives, musicians, journalists, regular people who loved country music, all of them waiting to hear what came next. George's voice filled the auditorium. "Tonight has been about the music that built this genre, the stories that matter, the authentic voices that keep country music rooted in truth. But it's also about remembering that those voices don't just come from stage-tested professionals. They come from everywhere, from anyone with something real to say." James's heart hammered against his ribs. "A month ago, I broke down on a rainy highway outside Nashville. A mechanic named James Carter stopped to help me, even though he was late getting home, even though he had every reason to keep driving. He didn't recognize me, didn't want anything from me. He just helped because that's who he is." George paused, letting that sink in. "During our conversation, I learned he used to play music, but stopped after losing his wife 4 years ago. Tonight, James is returning to music, and to honor that courage, I've asked him to share a song he wrote. Please welcome James Carter." The applause began as James walked onto the stage, his legs operating on autopilot because his conscious mind was too overwhelmed to function. The lights were bright but not blinding, and the audience was a sea of faces. Some expectant, some curious, some already emotionally invested based on George's introduction. George shook his hand warmly, then helped him settle onto the stool with Keith Whitley's Gibson. "You've got this," George whispered before stepping back. James sat alone in the spotlight. The silence was complete, expectant. He adjusted the microphone with shaking hands, positioned the guitar, and looked out at the audience. His eyes found Emily immediately. His anchor, his reason, his inspiration. She mouthed the words, "I love you," and something inside James settled. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice rough with emotion, but steady. "Thank you for having me. This is scary as hell." Surprised laughter rippled through the audience, breaking the tension. "I haven't performed in 4 years. I stopped making music when my wife Jennifer died because every song reminded me of her, and that hurt too much." James took a breath, forcing himself to continue. "But recently, someone reminded me that avoiding the music meant avoiding her memory too. So this song is called When the Light Stays On. I wrote it during her final week, about the small moments of grace that persist even in the darkest times. It's not a sad song exactly. It's about love that doesn't end just because life does." He positioned his fingers on the fretboard, closed his eyes for a moment, and began to play. The first notes rang out through the Ryman's perfect acoustics, and James felt the room embrace him. George had been right. The building itself was an instrument, carrying his voice and guitar with crystalline clarity. But more than that, the act of playing, of singing this truth to an audience, completed something that had been broken inside him for years. The fluorescent hums above your bed. Nurses speak in whispers. Your hand finds mine, though your eyes stay closed, and I count that among the whispers of grace that keep me standing here, while the world shrinks to this room. Your breathing soft, the monitors beep, but it's your smile that breaks the gloom. His voice grew stronger with each verse, the nervousness transforming into purpose. He wasn't performing for approval or acclaim. He was testifying, bearing witness to love and loss, and the human capacity to endure. When the light stays on through the longest night, when the dawn breaks soft and slow, I'll remember these moments, these whispers of grace, the love that won't let go, even when you go. The second verse detailed the small beauties Emily had brought to the hospital. Drawings, flowers, stories from school. The bridge acknowledged the pain, the fear, the impossibility of saying goodbye to someone woven into your every breath. And the final chorus returned to the central truth, that love persists, transforms, but never truly ends. So, I'll keep the light on. I'll remember your face. I'll tell our daughter your stories. She's got your grace. And when the darkness comes, as I know it will, I'll remember this love and be grateful still. The light stays on. The light stays on. The final chord faded into absolute silence. For a heartbeat, James thought he'd failed, that his confession had been too raw, too personal for this crowd. But then the applause began. Not polite, not obligatory, but thunderous and sustained. People stood, their faces reflecting emotion that mirrored what James had poured into the song. Tears streamed down Emily's face, but she was smiling, clapping frantically, her pride visible from the stage. Alan Jackson stood in the wings, nodding slowly with respect. George Strait returned to the stage, his own eyes bright with emotion, and embraced James firmly. "That," George said into his microphone as the applause continued, "is why we make music. Thank you, James." James returned to the wings in a daze, Rachel handing him a bottle of water and a towel for the sweat and tears on his face. The rest of the evening continued. More performances, more collaborations. But James experienced it from somewhere outside himself, still processing what had just happened. After the show concluded, he was ushered to a small reception room where industry people wanted to meet him, shake his hand, offer cards and phone numbers. Some were genuine, others calculating, but James accepted it all with overwhelmed gratitude. Alan Jackson spent 10 minutes talking to him about songwriting craft, offering insights that James would treasure. Several audience members approached with their own stories of loss, connecting over shared experience in the way that only music can facilitate. Emily found him eventually, launching herself into his arms with fierce pride. "Dad, you were incredible." Everyone was crying. I was crying. "That was Mom, wasn't it? Like, she was there." "Yeah, kiddo, she was there." George appeared with two other people, a distinguished woman in her 60s and a younger man with an attentive expression. "James, I want you to meet Diane Foster. She runs an independent label that focuses on authentic country and Americana. And this is Travis Caldwell from Nashville Roots magazine." George's expression was meaningful. "They'd both like to talk to you about opportunities." The next hour was surreal. Diane explained that she'd been deeply moved by his performance and wanted to discuss the possibility of recording an album. Nothing rushed, nothing commercial, just authentic songs recorded properly. Travis wanted to feature James in an article about everyday people with extraordinary stories, potentially leading to more performance opportunities. James listened, participated, but felt like he was watching himself from the outside. This wasn't why he'd agreed to perform. He'd done it to honor Jennifer, to reconnect with a lost part of himself, to show Emily that healing was possible. But apparently, that act of personal courage had resonated more widely than he'd imagined. Around 11 p.m., after most people had left, George found James sitting alone in the backstage area, still holding Keith Whitley's Gibson. "You can keep it," George said, sitting beside him. "It found its right home." "I can't accept this. It's too much." "You already earned it. The moment you helped me on that highway, the moment you picked up your guitar again, the moment you stepped onto that stage, you earned it at every step." George smiled. "Besides, I have a feeling you're going to need a good guitar for what comes next." "I'm not sure what comes next," James admitted. "This is all so overwhelming. Take your time. Talk to Diane and Travis when you're ready. Or don't talk to them at all. But keep playing, keep writing, keep living." That's the transformation, James. Not tonight's performance, but the decision to continue. That's when you truly honor Jennifer's memory. They shook hands, then embraced. Two men from different worlds, connected by music, kindness, and the shared understanding that life's most important moments often happen in the spaces between fame and obscurity. James found Emily waiting by his truck, the Nashville night alive around them with music spilling from every doorway. She looked exhausted, but radiantly happy. "Can we just drive for a while?" she asked. "I'm not ready to go home yet." They drove through Nashville with no particular destination, the windows down, warm spring air flowing through the cab. Emily plugged her phone into the aux cord and, after a moment's consideration, played George Strait's "I Cross My Heart." They listened in comfortable silence, father and daughter, processing a night that had changed everything. "Dad," Emily said eventually, "what are you going to do? About the label, the magazine, all of it?" "I honestly don't know yet. Part of me just wants to go back to the shop tomorrow and return to normal life. But it wouldn't be normal anymore, would it? You're different now." James considered this. She was right. He'd crossed a threshold tonight, stepped through a door that couldn't be closed again. The question wasn't whether he'd changed, but how he'd integrate this new version of himself with the life he'd built. "I need to think about it," he said finally. "But whatever I decide, we decide together. You're part of this too. Promise me something? Anything. Don't stop playing again. Even if you don't record an album or do more shows, don't stop. Mom would want you to keep the music alive. I promise." They drove until midnight, eventually returning home to the small house in Bordeaux that had witnessed so much grief. And now, finally, the beginning of joy. James carried his guitar, Keith Whitley's guitar, inside and propped it in the corner of the living room where he'd see it every day. That night, he slept deeply and dreamlessly for the first time in 4 years. And when he woke the next morning, the first thing he did was play. The morning after the Ryman performance, James woke to his phone buzzing with notifications. Text messages, voicemails, Facebook friend requests from people he'd never met, emails flooding his rarely checked inbox. Apparently, someone had recorded his performance and shared it on social media, and it was spreading in that unpredictable way that content sometimes does when it strikes an emotional chord. He ignored most of it, making breakfast for Emily as usual, both of them moving through their morning routine with a shared understanding that life needed some normalcy after the intensity of the previous night. But over coffee, they finally addressed the situation. "Your song has been shared like 50,000 times, Emily said, scrolling through her phone. "People are crying in the comments. Someone called you the mechanic poet. That's kind of cool." "That's kind of terrifying," James corrected, though he couldn't suppress a small smile. The attention was unprecedented and uncomfortable. James had spent 4 years deliberately keeping his head down, existing in a small, controlled world of work and parenting. This sudden exposure to public interest felt invasive, even though he understood it was meant positively. Danny called at 8 a.m., barely coherent with excitement. "Boss, you're like famous! There's a video of you at the Ryman with 2 million views. People are showing up at the shop asking if you're here." James drove to Carter's Auto Repair to find exactly that. A small cluster of people outside, some with guitars, some just curious locals who wanted to shake his hand. It was surreal and touching and deeply weird. He spent an hour politely accepting congratulations, posing for photos, and gently explaining that he had actual work to do. The business cards from Diane Foster and Travis Caldwell sat on his desk, physical reminders that decisions needed to be made. James stared at them while replacing the alternator on a Honda Accord, his hands working automatically while his mind grappled with impossible choices. On one hand, he could pursue this opportunity, record an album, do interviews, potentially perform more shows. It was the dream his younger self had carried. Recognition, impact, the validation that his music mattered to people beyond his immediate circle. And the financial implications weren't nothing. The shop made enough to sustain them, but Emily's college fund could use help, and he'd been driving the same truck for 12 years. On the other hand, he valued stability and privacy. He'd built a life around consistency and control after Jennifer's death specifically because chaos had nearly destroyed him. Opening himself to the unpredictability of the music industry, even the independent side of it, meant surrendering that carefully maintained equilibrium. "You're overthinking it," Danny observed during lunch, both men sitting in the garage with sandwiches. "Why can't you do both? Fix cars during the day? Make music at night? You're already doing that anyway. It's not that simple." "Why not? Seems like you're looking for reasons to say no because you're scared," which is fair, by the way. But don't confuse fear with wisdom. James appreciated Danny's directness. The kid had good instincts beneath his youthful enthusiasm. Still, the weight of the decision felt enormous, compounded by the knowledge that whatever he chose would affect Emily too. That evening, James called George Strait. The legendary musician answered on the third ring, his voice warm and unhurried despite surely having countless demands on his time. "James, how are you holding up?" "Overwhelmed, confused, a little scared." James sat in his garage, Keith Whitley's Gibson across his lap. "People keep calling this a transformative moment, but I don't know what I'm supposed to transform into." George laughed gently. "Nobody knows that at first. Can I tell you something about my career? I spent years convinced I had to choose between being authentic and being successful. I thought commercial success meant compromising, selling out, becoming something I wasn't. But eventually, I learned you can honor both. You can make music that's true to yourself and reach a wide audience. It's not easy, and it requires strong boundaries, but it's possible." How do I even begin to figure out those boundaries? By staying connected to why you started. Why did you pick up the guitar again, James? Not why did you perform at the Ryman? That was my invitation. But why did you actually agree? James considered the question seriously. For Emily. To show her that healing is possible. That we don't have to be frozen in grief forever. And maybe for Jennifer too. To fulfill the promise I made her. There's your boundary. As long as your decisions serve those purposes, you're on the right track. The moment it becomes about ego or money or fame, you'll know because it'll feel wrong. Trust that feeling. After hanging up, James sat with that advice. It clarified things considerably. He didn't need to decide his entire future tonight, just the next step. On April 22nd, James called Diane Foster. They met at a coffee shop in East Nashville, a neighborhood filled with artists, musicians, and the creative types who gave the city its soul. Diane was exactly as she'd appeared at the Ryman reception. Professional but warm, businesslike but genuinely passionate about music. She ordered a black coffee and got straight to the point. "I'm not going to pressure you or paint unrealistic pictures," she began. "Independent labels like mine don't make artists rich or famous in the traditional sense. What we do is provide resources for authentic artists to record their work properly and reach audiences who appreciate substance over flash." "What would that actually look like?" James asked. "Ideally, we'd record an album, 8 to 10 original songs. We'd do it right here in Nashville with experienced session musicians and a producer who understands your style. The process would take several months, working around your schedule. We'd handle production, distribution, and marketing. You'd retain creative control and ownership of your music." Diane slid a folder across the table. "Here's a standard contract. Take it to a lawyer. Have them review it. I'm not trying to take advantage of your inexperience." James appreciated the transparency. They talked for an hour about logistics, expectations, and Diane's vision. She showed him examples of other artists on her label. People with day jobs who recorded music as an extension of their lives rather than a replacement for them. Teachers, nurses, a firefighter who wrote songs about loss and heroism. People like James. "My concern is the shop," James admitted. "It's my responsibility, my legacy from my father. I can't abandon it for music." "Then don't. Record on weekends. Work with a producer who understands your constraints. You'd be surprised how many great albums are made in the margins of busy lives." Diane smiled. "Some of the best art comes from people who live in the real world, not from those isolated in the industry bubble." James took the contract home, spent 3 days reading through it carefully, and paid for 2 hours of a music attorney's time to review it. The terms were fair, generous even. Diane's label would invest in the recording, but take only a modest percentage of sales and streaming revenue. James would own his masters and could walk away after the first album if it didn't work out. On April 28th, he signed the contract. The decision unleashed a cascade of activity. Diane connected him with a producer named Marcus. No, wait, that name was prohibited. She connected him with a producer named Paul Richardson, a veteran of the Nashville scene who'd worked with both major and independent artists. Paul visited James at the shop in early May, a bearded man in his 50s with kind eyes and an impressive knowledge of cars. And they spent an afternoon talking about both engines and songwriting, finding surprising parallels between the two crafts. "Both require understanding systems," Paul explained, examining a transmission James was rebuilding. "In music, you've got melody, harmony, rhythm, lyrics, all working together. Miss one element, and the whole thing falls apart, just like this transmission." They agreed to begin recording in June, working Saturdays and occasional evenings. Paul suggested James write at least 4 more songs to complement "When the Light Stays On" and create a cohesive album. The prospect was daunting but exciting. James hadn't written new material in years, and the idea of creating something from scratch rather than resurrecting old work felt like genuine forward movement. Travis Caldwell's article for Nashville Roots magazine, published on May 15th, titled "The Mechanic's Muse: How Grief and Kindness Brought James Carter Back to Music." It was thoughtful, well-written, and told James's story without sensationalizing his pain. The piece included quotes from George Strait, Alan Jackson, and Emily, who'd spoken beautifully about watching her father heal through music. The article brought more attention: interview requests, podcast invitations, messages from people sharing their own grief stories. James was selective, declining most opportunities but accepting a few that felt meaningful. He appeared on a local NPR affiliate, to discuss the intersection of blue-collar work and artistic expression. He did a podcast interview about parenting through grief. Each experience pushed him slightly outside his comfort zone, but never so far that he lost touch with his core identity. Emily thrived during this period. She'd always been strong, but watching her father pursue something meaningful beyond obligation gave her permission to dream bigger too. She auditioned for a competitive summer theater program and got accepted. She started writing poetry, sharing some pieces with James that showed remarkable emotional depth. Father and daughter grew even closer, their relationship evolving from survival partnership to genuine companionship. The recording sessions began on June 7th at a studio in Berry Hill, a neighborhood south of downtown known for its concentration of music industry businesses. The studio was intimate, a single large room with excellent acoustics, vintage equipment alongside modern technology, and walls covered with photographs of recording sessions past. James arrived at 9 a.m. that first Saturday, nervous but prepared. Paul had assembled a small group of session musicians, a fiddle player named Katie Walsh, a bassist named Jerome Williams, and a pedal steel guitarist named Raymond Chen. They were all seasoned professionals who'd played on countless recordings, and they treated James with respect rather than condescension, appreciating his authenticity even while helping refine his rough edges. "Let's start with When the Light Stays On," Paul suggested. "You've performed it, you're comfortable with it. We'll capture that, then build from there." They worked through the song multiple times, Paul coaching James on microphone technique and breath control, the session musicians adding subtle embellishments that enhanced without overwhelming. By early afternoon, they had a take that made James's chest tight with emotion. It sounded like his song, his truth, but elevated by professional production into something that could reach beyond personal catharsis into genuine art. Over the following weeks, they recorded the other songs James had written. Morning Coffee, the gentle meditation on married life. Emily's song, updated with a new verse reflecting her teenage years. Highway Home, about the journey between obligation and choice. And 3 new compositions, The Tools My Father Left, about inherited legacy and responsibility. Second movement, about the courage to begin again. And Grace in the Ordinary, celebrating the small moments that constitute a meaningful life. The recording process was intensive, but never felt like work. James learned about arrangement, production techniques, the subtle choices that separated good recordings from great ones. Paul was an excellent teacher, explaining his decisions while remaining open to James's instincts. The session musicians contributed ideas that enhanced the songs while respecting James's vision. Danny managed the shop competently during James's absences, proving himself capable and earning a raise that James was happy to provide. The business actually grew slightly, possibly due to the publicity, though James made sure the quality of work never suffered in service to volume. On July 20th, they finished recording. Paul estimated another month for mixing and mastering, with a projected release date in October. Diane suggested a small release concert, perhaps at the Bluebird Cafe, an intimate venue famous for songwriter showcases. James agreed, surprising himself with his willingness to perform again. Summer passed in a blur of normal life, punctuated by extraordinary moments. James worked at the shop, spent evenings with Emily, practiced guitar on the back porch while fireflies danced in the humid darkness. He went on a few dates with a teacher named Laura Bennett, whom he'd met through Emily's school. Nothing serious yet, but the possibility of connection no longer felt like betrayal. Jennifer's memory remained central to his life, but it had transformed from an open wound into something more like a foundation, a base upon which new experiences could be built. In early August, George Strait invited James and Emily back to his farm for a barbecue. It was a casual gathering of musicians and friends, the kind of low-key event that famous people appreciate, precisely because it doesn't require performance. James found himself sitting on George's porch, trading stories with Alan Jackson about their daughters, while Emily played guitar with some younger musicians inside the house. "You did it," George said during a quiet moment. 30 days after helping me on that highway, your life transformed. But it wasn't magic, James. It was you, making hard choices, facing fear, honoring love while embracing life. I couldn't have done it without you pushing me. I didn't push. I opened a door. You walked through it. George smiled. That's the difference between interference and opportunity. On October 10th, James Carter's debut album, When the Light Stays On, released on Diane's label. The physical CDs featured a cover photograph of James's workbench at the shop, tools arranged carefully, Keith Whitley's guitar leaning against the wall, morning light streaming through the window. It perfectly captured the album's thesis, that beauty and art exist not in opposition to ordinary life, but embedded within it. The album received modest but enthusiastic attention. It wouldn't make any mainstream charts, but it found its audience. People who valued authenticity, who'd experienced loss, who understood that the most profound transformations happen in quiet moments rather than grand gestures. Several tracks got regional radio play. When the Light Stays On was featured in a popular grief support podcast. Reviews praised the album's emotional honesty and craftsmanship. The release concert at the Bluebird Cafe on October 15th sold out within hours. The intimate venue, with its 90-seat capacity, was packed with a mix of industry people, local fans, and folks who'd followed James's story. George and Alan both attended, sitting in the back row, two legends choosing to honor an emerging artist. James performed the entire album live, his nervousness from the Ryman performance replaced by quiet confidence. He told stories between songs, about Jennifer, about Emily, about his father's shop, about the rainy night that changed everything. The audience was rapt, many openly crying during When the Light Stays On, laughing during the lighter moments, creating the kind of sacred space that only happens when artist and audience achieve genuine connection. Emily watched from the front row, her face glowing with pride. Afterward, she hugged him fiercely and whispered, "Mom was here tonight. I felt her." "Me too, kiddo. Me too." The months following the album release brought opportunities James carefully evaluated against his core principles. He accepted a handful of performance invitations, songwriter circles, small venues, a spot at a regional folk festival. He declined offers that felt wrong. A reality show about musicians with day jobs, a major label's interest in packaging his story, interviews that wanted to sensationalize grief rather than honor it. Carter's auto repair continued thriving. James hired a second full-time mechanic, a woman named Patricia Hayes, who brought 20 years of experience and became both excellent employee and good friend. The shop's reputation grew, partly due to James's newfound visibility, but mostly because the work remained exceptional. On November 20th, James received an unexpected package. Inside was a handwritten letter from a woman in Oregon who'd lost her husband to cancer. She wrote about how When the Light Stays On had helped her navigate grief, had given her permission to keep living while honoring her loss. She included a photograph of herself smiling at her husband's favorite hiking spot, a place she'd finally found the courage to revisit. "Your song reminded me that love doesn't end," she wrote. "It just changes form. Thank you for helping me understand that." James added the letter to a growing collection, messages from strangers sharing how his music had touched them. Each one reminded him why he'd picked up the guitar again, why vulnerability mattered, why art served purposes beyond entertainment. Christmas 2026 arrived with the first significant snow Nashville had seen in years. James and Emily decorated their small house together, hanging Jennifer's favorite ornaments, playing Christmas music, including some country classics that no longer brought pain. Laura joined them for Christmas Eve dinner, her presence comfortable rather than intrusive. Another sign that life continued expanding in healthy ways. On December 28th, exactly 10 months after helping George Strait on that rainy highway, James sat in his garage late at night, guitar in his lap, a new song forming. It wasn't about grief this time, but about gratitude, for second chances, for unexpected kindness, for the way light persists even in darkness. The lyrics came easily. I fixed your truck on a February night. Never knew the gift you'd give, didn't want your money, didn't need your fame, just wanted to help you live. But you saw something in me I couldn't see. A spark beneath the pain, and 30 days later, everything had changed, though I'm still the same. He worked on the song for hours, refining, adjusting, letting it evolve organically. This would be for the next album, whenever that came. There was no rush. Music was now integrated into his life rather than consuming it. A sustainable practice rather than desperate escape. Around 2 a.m., Emily appeared in the garage doorway, wrapped in a blanket. Can't sleep? Just working on something. Did I wake you? No. I was reading. She sat on the step, listening as James played through what he had. When he finished, she smiled. That's really good, Dad. Is it about George? About the whole experience, really. How one moment of kindness can ripple outward in ways you never expect. Like how you helping him helped you too. Exactly. They sat in comfortable silence, father and daughter, the space heater humming, the Nashville night quiet around them. James thought about the journey from that rainy February night to this peaceful December moment. How impossible this contentment would have seemed a year ago. How completely grief had convinced him that joy was finished. You know what Mom would say about all this? Emily asked softly. What? She'd say, see? I told you your music mattered. Now stop being stubborn and keep playing. Emily's impression of Jennifer was spot on, and they both laughed. She did say that a lot, because it was true. Emily stood, kissed the top of his head. Don't stay up too late. We've got brunch with Laura tomorrow. After she went back inside, James played for a while longer, then carefully returned the guitar to its stand. Before turning off the garage light, he looked at the bulletin board, where Jennifer's photograph smiled eternally. 4 years ago, he would have seen only loss. Tonight, he saw love, past, present, and continuing forward. Thank you, he whispered to her image, to the memory, to whatever part of her remained in the songs and in Emily, and in the man he'd become through loving her. For everything. I'm going to keep the light on. And he did. March 2027. The bell above the door of Carter's Auto Repair chimed as a customer entered. James looked up from the invoice he was completing to see a young man, maybe 25, holding a guitar case and looking nervous. Can I help you? James asked. Are you James Carter? The James Carter who recorded When the Light Stays On. That's me, though I'm also the James Carter who fixes transmissions. What can I do for you? The young man set down his guitar case. My name is Tyler Brooks. I'm a musician here in Nashville. Been trying to make it for 3 years. Working construction during the day, playing open mics at night, the usual story. He paused, gathering courage. I was ready to give up. Move back to Kentucky, get a normal job, except that music wasn't meant for me. But then I heard your album, read your story. about how you're a mechanic who makes music, how you don't have to choose between practical life and artistic dreams. James smiled, recognizing his younger self in this earnest face. That's the truth I've learned anyway. Would you listen to one of my songs? I know you're busy and this is crazy, but I just thought maybe you'd understand. James glanced at the clock. 3:30 p.m. His next appointment wasn't until 4:00. He nodded toward the office. Got about 20 minutes. Play me something. Tyler's face lit up with gratitude. He opened his case, pulled out a well-worn acoustic guitar, and began to play a song about small-town dreams and big-city realities. It was rough around the edges, but honest. The kind of authentic storytelling that country music needed. When he finished, James nodded thoughtfully. You've got something real there. Needs polish, but the heart is solid. You working with anyone? Not really. Can't afford a producer or studio time yet. James wrote a name and number on a piece of paper. Call Paul Richardson. Tell him I sent you. He works with artists on flexible payment plans. Won't be free, but he's fair. He added another number. And this is Danny Rodriguez. He works for me, but he's studying to get his contractor's license. He might know of construction work that pays better than what you're doing. Tyler stared at the paper like it was a winning lottery ticket. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. James thought about a rainy February night, a stranded stranger, and a choice that changed everything. Someone helped me when I needed it. That's what we do. We help each other. Music isn't a competition, Tyler. There's enough room for all of us. After Tyler left, his gratitude almost overwhelming, James returned to his work. But he smiled to himself, understanding that this was part of it too. The ripples continuing outward, kindness begetting kindness, light spreading from person to person. That evening, he picked up Emily from her college campus orientation at Belmont University. She'd been accepted to their prestigious songwriting program and would start in the fall. As they drove home through Nashville's familiar streets, she told him excitedly about the professors she'd met, the facilities she'd seen, the future unfolding before her. Think you'll keep working at the shop while I'm in school? She asked. Absolutely. I love it. The music is important, but the shop grounds me, keeps me connected to the real world. Besides, your grandfather would haunt me if I abandoned his legacy. You're doing another album, though, right? Eventually. When the songs are ready. No rush. James glanced at his daughter. No longer a girl, but a young woman stepping into her own life. What about you? Excited? Scared? Both. Mostly excited. She looked at him seriously. Dad, thank you. For what? For showing me that it's okay to pursue dreams, but also okay to be practical. That you can honor the people you've lost while building new relationships. That being broken doesn't mean staying broken. Her voice carried the wisdom of someone who'd grown up too fast, but landed somewhere healthy. You could have stayed stuck in grief. Instead, you became someone I'm incredibly proud of. James had to pull over because tears blurred his vision. They sat on the side of the road, holding hands across the truck's center console, both crying and laughing at the unexpected emotion. Your mom would be so proud of you, James managed finally. Of both of us, Emily corrected. They drove home as the sun set over Nashville, the sky painted in brilliant oranges and purples. The radio played a George Strait song, one of the classics, and James sang along softly, his voice carrying no more pain, only appreciation. At home, he made dinner while Emily did homework. Later, he practiced guitar on the back porch, working on new material for the eventual second album. The songs came easier now, flowing from a place of wholeness rather than emptiness. Before bed, James did what he'd done every night for 4 years. He looked at Jennifer's photograph, remembered her love, and spoke to her presence. But tonight, his words were different. "I'm happy," he told her simply. "Not happy that you're gone. I'll never be happy about that. But happy that I'm alive, that Emily is thriving, that music is back in my life. I think you'd approve. I hope you'd approve." The photograph offered no answer, but James didn't need one. He understood now that Jennifer lived in the choices he made, the love he shared, the songs he created. She lived in Emily's strength and his own resilience. She lived in every moment he chose to keep the light on, rather than surrender to darkness. Outside, Nashville hummed with its eternal music. Guitars from Broadway bars, laughter from rooftop patios, the ambient sound of a city built on dreams and songs. James opened the window, letting that sound drift in, adding his own guitar to the collective symphony. The lights stayed on, and the music played on. And James Carter, mechanic, father, widower, musician, survivor, lived on fully and gratefully, exactly as love required.